So going further, today what we are looking at doing is from learning outcome 2, we will get into something called learning outcome 3. And here the idea would be to understand, key things which are in terms of, what we want to do is slightly understand the categorization of the travel and tourism market. So the first part is what we're going to be focusing on is primarily to understand how the categorization of the industry happens. How big is this industry? So we will try and look at it on a map in terms of what are the various key sectors within this travel and tourism and hospitality industry. We will look at understanding some of them in a bit more detail. So I put together some slides which basically would then look at explaining the main types or the key types that we want to identify, and then what are their functions and how and what services they provide when we look at, say, a particular sector. So things like, food and beverage could be one, accommodation could be one, airlines could be one. So we'll identify all of those, broad sectors, and within that we'll study their roles and what is their contribution to the overall, industry or the sector in general. We'll also look at the concept of something called vertical and horizontal integration. And we'll start off with the definitions of understanding what is vertical integration and what is horizontal integration. And then in this case, what we want to be able to do is study or look at one example which will help us understand this concept and why and under what conditions, these kind of mergers and acquisitions, or essentially what you look at is, takeovers essentially happen. And why does it make sense for, key players in the market to look at vertical and horizontal integration? So I put together a few slides here just to look at dwelling into this concept, and then we'll pick this up with a bit of an example. Now, along with this particular task in the learning outcome, what we also want to be able to do is understand, which I briefly mentioned, things like ATHE, ATOL, some of the key organizations which are a part and parcel of this particular sector. And over the years, they have, their role and function has become quite important because they help in either, ensuring that there is a legislation and law which applies one and all, or similar laws and legislation apply across all tour operators, travel agents, and other participatory, players in this market. And, what we want to be able to do is also understand that some of these players are global bodies, and they help in creation of legislation, which then becomes at some stage a norm or a de facto standard in the industry, and helps consumers and helps the operators protect against, untoward instances, or, in cases, say, or in situations which, are non-congenial for business, which leads to, losses and things like that. So we'll understand a few organizations which I put together a few slides and definitions for. And lastly, what we want to do is we've covered the classification of tourism, to a certain extent, why people travel, and what is the classification when we talk about things like medical tourism, travel for education purposes, business, professional. But here in this task, what we want to be able to look at is we would classify tourism in particular. Then we look at classification of tourism activities, and to a certain extent, what we can also look at is the classification of a tourist in terms of when they travel for a particular reason. And the idea would be to try and understand why classification is required, what are the challenges classification faces, when you try and do the classification you face, and then how does classification actually help the operators or the players in this industry to look at, obviously driving tourism and tourism activities. It's a quite extensive learning outcome, and I think quite an interesting one, because this will help us really understand, what tourism and tourism, activities. It takes us back to the very initial beginnings of understanding, or what we get to see on television, in magazines, and advertising in general. And I think we'll be able to correlate to a lot of things that we see currently on some of the slides that I put together. Now, my slides are not that graphic, but if I had a bit more time, I would make them a bit more graphic. But some of the real-time concepts which are coming in now, which have really become possible after 2012, 2015, I would put it this way: the new concepts and ideas which are coming out of Silicon Valley. Things like when we look at Uber as a taxi sharing service. Now, that is not directly a part of travel and tourism industry. That kind of an idea has actually revolutionized cab sharing or cab service essentially, wherever they've introduced in the world. So I think they are present about in 28, 29 countries at this moment. But wherever they are present, because of the availability of telecom and other technological factors, this technology then allows users to book a cab from a smartphone. So we will look at some of the similar, let's put it this way, similar innovations which are currently embracing the tourism and hospitality sector, and how things are changing and becoming easier for consumers to look at holiday and holiday packages. So I'll try and obviously bring across some current examples which are relevant when we look at classification in general. But I think as some of them, I'll open up some websites just to show you and give you some direction in terms of where to look at a bit more reading, to get the current concepts. So if you have any questions, as always, just stop me in the middle, and what we'll do is we'll look at those queries and questions as we go along.
Sure.
Now, let's look at the first one. The first part basically talks about, how do we look at identifying the main sectors or main responsibilities within this particular, big industry or big sector, as we call it, which is travel, tourism, and hospitality. Now, this is a good map or a good picture which actually shows all players which actually make up this industry. So when we talk about hospitality industry or T&H in general, we don't include the word travel, because travel is an activity initiating out of this particular sector. So tourism and hospitality is the sector, and the activity which people undertake when they look at associating with this sector would be travel in general. So when we look at that, let's look at the 5 or 6 broad types of I would say pillars which make up this industry. One of the key pillars that we look at is food industry or food services. There are different types to cover, but food is a very important part of this sector, because if you're traveling for business, professional, whatever reasons, there is always a need for you to be able to wine and dine, and obviously food, as in terms of will become an important part and parcel of this particular sector. So whether you're staying at a hotel, whether you're traveling or taking a flight, you get meals which are served, and obviously the second most important thing that we see in the sector is hotels. So obviously when you're traveling, which is the activity which you do in this particular sector, tourism and hospitality, for various reasons, education, business, professionalism, even for politics, any reason for which you travel, you will always need a place to stay. And that is where the concept of hotels, bed and breakfast, or holidays and things like that actually come in. So hotels are a key part of this particular sector. We have also looked at services which are events. Now events we typically cover under MICE, but events could be different types. So MICE is one type of event which is the largest revenue driver under this particular main category. But you also have events which are, like, for example, I was mentioning yesterday the Cannes Film Festival or the the awards which happen, in the Hollywood nights and things like that, like the BAFTA awards that we talk about in the UK. Now, these are big events for which you will see people travel. A lot of actors, actresses, they travel across, because a lot of industry associated with the film industry actually travels, and that is also classified under events. And what we do get to see is that this is also one of the key things under events, which happen. Events is the third important cog when we look at when you talk about hospitality and tourism sector. What we do say is, okay, events is an integral part, and this has to be studied in a bit more detail. Now, travel and tourism becomes an activity, so this is important. But within travel and tourism, there are various routes, various types that you can use to do a travel to a particular destination. That means that you go by land, you go by sea, you go by air. So if it's air travel, that's airlines. If you go by ships, or sometimes you take a cruise, that is sea travel. And when you travel by land, for example, if you go and take the Eurostar or the Palace on Wheels, or maybe some of the other roads, transportation by road, then you look at basically that happens in particular. Now, across the globe, there are lots of tours and packages which are created under this particular provision, wherein they utilize different types of travel, and that travel primarily all happening for tourism or for leisure activities or whatever that we classify. But that would mean that people tend to take different routes so that they are able to either spend time or kind of look at a different experience. And that is why sometimes you will say, okay, if I'm traveling to Europe, I'm going to be looking at doing a caravanning trip. So, for example, you end up hiring a caravan and you do a road trip, wherein you'll have the ability to be able to make stops and stopovers and travel as per your plan. But if you're planning on a travel wherein you want to see a lot of countries, sometimes what you'll do is you'll take a package tour or a bus tour or a coach tour, and that would mean again you're traveling for 2 days. But or any sort of activity, but it is a form of travel that you're doing, and you're taking a particular route either by sea, road, rail, or by air. Now, there are other aspects of this industry which are growing, and they themselves form a category, and we classify them in others because of the fact that they are quite big, but they're not as big enough in terms of revenue generators. And at some stage, what we want to be able to do is, because they are only very specific niche activities, we want to club them into others. So when we say travel for education, travel for education, yes, it is available in some countries. Like if you look at international students, in the world for study or for higher education or further education is the US. So about 1.25 million students travel to US every year on visas for study purposes. Could be various study purposes. But education is, I don't see a lot many countries which are identified as destinations for education, and that is why it's been clubbed into others. So UK, about about zero point 0.6 million students come in every year internationally study UK universities. Similarly, you look at France, Germany, some of the other destinations. But if I look at Africa, I might not see many countries or many institutes or universities where students would want to go for travel. Canada is emerging. South America, probably not. Australia, yes. If I look at China emerging, look at Russia, no. So you do not see a lot of travel happening from a point of view of students. That's why some industries which contribute revenue, but not that much revenue is actually, under others. So if I look at UK in general or Britain in general, I think the education industry is worth about £1 billion in terms of revenue that it brings in, but it could be classified as one of the things which tourism brings into the UK. And this, because the significant part is smaller, it's a portion of the significant revenue which comes in under travel and tourism, but it's a smaller portion under education. That's why we'll club it under others. So there are other areas which we look at, like human resources, training. Sometimes people travel for 2 or 3 short days for trips, attending exhibitions. So that's why these are kind of very niche functions, but they will be grouped into something called others. Now, one of the other emerging field which is coming across now is something called luxury services. And this is something which we need to relate to, is because now people in the developed countries or people which have the economic capacity in terms of income and living standards, they are able to afford a second home, or they are able to afford stay in certain locations, which then tends to be that they have a second home in that location or a villa in that location, or the idea of sharing of homes or services, wherein you have a villa that is booked across, you're a part of that, association, and that allows you to have that villa or maybe, a cruise or something like that under those services of, which are luxury, because these are things which normally an average user cannot afford because of the income levels and, the status, or some of these things require status and reputation, which is not there. But things like, you have exclusivity or exclusive kind of, let's put it this way, you have an exclusivity to use an air travel or a personal plane or a boat or a cruise, or for example, share a villa or a hotel. And these are things which are all clubbed in luxury services, which a certain amount of people can afford. So to give you an example, if you look at the Middle East, and Chelsea, you might want maybe able to relate to, because you've just come back from holiday there. You look at Jumeirah Beach and you look at the palms and a lot of developments which are happening in the Middle East, which are reclaiming land from the sea, but they have created very luxurious apartments, villas, which a lot of people are buying, and those are being bought as a second home or as a holiday home. And in those cases, you would see that a certain set of people from all over the world are able to afford that, and that is what would kind of come in under the classification of luxury services. Sometimes you
Okay.
see, sometimes you also see that certain companies would hire a corporate jet, for example, and these services are then only available to top or the most senior members of the organization. So when you look at the CEO or maybe the chief financial officer, CFO, these kind of people have such luxury services, within an organization. But the organization might not own that private jet, but they'll be able to take those services at a very, very high cost from a company, but they tend to be shared services, and those are things which we will tend to kind of club into a sector called luxury services under this. Now, some people like Richard Branson, he owns his own island in the Caribbean. He owns also maybe an own apartment or a large luxurious villa in the palms in the Middle East. So when they created a development wherein they created a world map of countries, and each of the countries were then sold to affluent people. So I think Richard Branson ended up buying Great Britain, as the land in that location in the Middle East. So these are very, very influential people, and this is a category which brings in strong revenue, and that is why it is clubbed not with any other category but as separate category as luxury services. But a very minute percentage of people have access to this, and these, I would say, broadly classify the five or six different types or sectors within the tourism and hospitality industry. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, is that clear enough?
Yes,
Okay.
it is.
Good. Now, they should have come in earlier. Obviously, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry that relies on disposable income and time which people spend. And the reason why you're traveling in some locations, some cases, is that you're traveling because you want to be able to, look at making use of some of these facilities, and that is why it involves a spend of a lot of money. And sorry, that's fine. I thought probably the slide is misplaced. So that means that these are the broad sectors that we want to be able to look at. Now, what I've done is after that, the image of the map that you've seen, which basically classifies them, I put together a few slides just to look at understanding them in a bit more detail. So the first one we look at when you look at hotels, or when we look at lodging and accommodation, this is one of the key sectors within this industry. And obviously, you have a star rating system within this sector, which has emerged over the years. We have 1 star to up to 7 star hotels, and sometimes the rating system has been created because it differentiates the kind of products and services which each type of this hotel or the place of stay actually ends up providing. Now, vaguely, I haven't covered this in the slide, but vaguely, if I look at, I think when this star system actually started in the early 80s and the late 90s, what it intended to do was that if you were traveling to destinations and if it had 24-hour electricity and heating and all, it was 1 star. But at some stage, it went to 2 stars because certain basic amenities which were added, like a coffee shop which was available 24 hours during the course of your stay, then it became 2 star. Then if it had, I think, one or two Michelin star restaurants, or restaurants which cater to at least 2 or 3 different types of cuisines which were made possible, then the rating became 3 star. 4 star was added when the swimming pool and some of the other facilities like air conditioning and availability of suites or certain types of suites came into the hotel industry, and I think it then added the 4 star rating. At 5 stars, you had a lot of other things which included luxury living within a destination. And then the 6 and the 7 stars got added on over the years because they might give you access to your own, say, butler in the suite if you've booked a suite, or in some cases, you have access to your own pool or sauna and spa facilities. And these were things which have got added onto the sector over the years under lodging or boarding, and because of which the star rating system has also evolved. And I think the highest rating currently is a 7 star deluxe hotel, which primarily will have all these things available, apart from, say, things like you have an access to your own driver, butler, a limousine, these kind of features which hotels try to differentiate and in order to attract more visitors coming and staying, and they want to be able to cater to different strata of the income levels or the disposable incomes which people have. So lodging and accommodation, is one of the most important part, of this sector, because it generates one of the largest amount of revenues. So if you look at your package or your destination or the income between your holiday package, sometimes you calculate that, okay, I'm going to be spending, 50% on my stay, and then 30% on my flight and excursions, and maybe 20% on fooding. We do that provision or budgeting is primarily because we want to be able to choose and look at different factors, decision factors for your, let's say the holiday or the vacation that you're taking, and you kind of split your budget up. So the idea of doing that is you also in somewhere subconsciously or unconsciously are splitting it up in such a way that you know that these are the major spends that you're going to do when you go on a particular holiday or on a vacation. Now, in terms of when we look at the accommodation and lodging, we basically look at three different types, and they then are classified, either going by this rating system that I talked about, or sometimes you will see that, when I was young, probably give you an example, as a student, I used to travel, and the whole idea was we used to have a rucksack, a sleeping bag, and we used to, make out and go out on, weekend trips. So we're traveling, nothing fancy, no major hotel, but we'll find a hostel like the YMCA hostels or, shared accommodations. And the idea was to try and save as much money on lodging, because you were only going to be there, but most of the time was out and about or, traveling with people. So lodging was the bit which we had spent the least amount of money. Or primarily, if you could get to stay for free. So, for example, stay with relatives, sometimes go and stay with friends. And, that is the concept wherein you kind of have a place to sleep overnight, and then you're up and running, and you're kind of, in the city or in the hustle bustle in terms of visiting the city that you've traveled to. Then at some stage, you look at, traveling where you want everything to be structured. So you book maybe apart from hotels, but you try and you are able to afford. So you book maybe suites, and there are different types in terms of classification. But here they provide you a lot of different facilities, and sometimes you will see that breakfast is included, and there were different concepts which came across. So sometimes when you look at booking hotels, you have the AM meal, which is the American breakfast or the morning meals included, and that terminology which kind of started off, from the American side in terms of having motels and, drive away motels and things like that, wherein the lodging actually included, the breakfast. And that then came across as a classification. So over the years, that definition has changed. Sometimes you have full board, as a classification, you have half board. Full board means that you have all meals included, which is your breakfast, your lunch and your dinners. Half board means you have only breakfast included, or maybe you have an option including only dinners. And, these are things which have changed over the years, which have now become a part and parcel of, accommodation or, the hotel stay. So as the classification system improved, from 1 star, it was just a lodging and accommodation, and it moved up. I think a lot of hotels and these chains which have started to come across, they started to offer some of these activities, or include some of these things, and food then became an integral part of your stay. So lodging, suites, and resorts. Now, resorts are primarily wherein, people want to go across on, we use a term normally which is vacation. Now, there's a difference between a vacation and a holiday. Have you realized that is there a difference? We use these terms interchangeably, but actually, if you see, there is a difference between when you're doing a holiday and there's a difference between when you take a vacation.
Okay.
Is there a difference? There is definitely a difference, but because these terms are used quite interchangeably, what we've done is we've forgotten, the reasons why. So when you look at, I think in terms of, the basic literal definition, when we look at is, if you go to a particular place and you are going there for the first time and you do not visit that again, I would to a certain extent say that that is a holiday because you do not prefer to go back to that location again. But if you go back to that location again and again over a period of time, over a period of time, when I say number of years, then that tends to be a vacation that you take, as a family, or you go out to that location more often than probably some of the other things that you do in terms of activity. So sometimes a vacation or a holiday can be used interchangeably, but there are subtle differences between the two, and they tend to be vacations tend to be regular occupations, which means you're regularly traveling to a destination, and they are termed as vacation. But if you're going across as a traveler and you love traveling to different places, you would normally say, I'm taking a specific trip to this, or I'm making a trip to this location this time during the summers, and that would be classified, as a holiday because your reasons of going to that location might be changing. Sometimes it might be recreation, sometimes it might be just resting, meeting friends, or if you're going to a new location altogether, that will be having a very different reason. And that is where the classification of different types of tourism comes in. You know, so you might not want to go on a religious tourism or medical tourism again and again. So these are short holidays that you end up taking because of a specific reason and you don't go to that location again. But in certain cases, like if I say Disneyland, you went with your kids when they were young and 3, 4, 5 years old, and then you go when they are in the teens. And you also then can take a vacation when they are quite old, but they have their own kids and you go as grandparents. So that tends to be a vacation spot rather than a holiday spot. So sometimes there's a difference which comes across, and that is where you will see that difference also appearing when we say hotels and when we say resorts. So resorts basically have everything within, the location. And an example that I'll give you here, just to give you an understanding, is if you take a city break, the reason why you're going for a city break is, and you choose a hotel in the center of the city or maybe a central location, is because you want everything in terms of accessibility to be very close by, walking distance and stuff. So in the case of casinos, for example, when you go and stay in a hotel where there's a casino, or locations like Las Vegas, or when you go to Amsterdam or Macau, you will basically see that they have designed these locations as resorts because they are cities within the cities, and there is lots to do in terms of activities within the hotel or within the location. That is why they have a classification of a resort. That means you can pretty much do every kind of activity depending on the nature of it, why you're booking. So if you're going in for, say, a holiday when you want to gamble, you want to do most of the activities within the hotel, you'll probably end up going to a destination and choose a place which primarily will have all of these internally. Sometimes you book a holiday which is a resort because you want to be able to do some of the activities within that, but it is not necessarily for you to go outside that location. So Disneyland, if I give you an example, would classify as a resort because within the Disneyland as a location, whether it's Paris, Florida, wherever you go, you will see that there are a number of hotels. There are loads of activities that you need to do, and your package or the tour actually is only for Disneyland. It does not say Paris, or if you have to look at a split that you say that I'll go to Disneyland and I also want 2 days in Paris, then the tour operator would put together a tour for you, or a travel agent would put it together for you because they are simply two different, packages. So it's not really a type of a location which provides accommodation, but here you have all the popular activities that you can do within the location without having to travel out. So sometimes when you see large places or large hotels that you go to or destinations you go to, they try and retain you within the location because there's lots to do and you do not need to travel outside. Sometimes it does happen when you take family holidays so that you are able to take care of, the parents being busy with the casino, or maybe, they have leisure activities that they can try out within the hotel. The kids are busy because they have, these rides and other things within that location. And the resort might have their own private beach wherein the young couples, or, as you as young people can go out and have your fun as well. And they need to be, resorts. So if I also look at an example of, say, you book holidays specifically when you go to Ibiza, Majorca, for example, or some of these locations in the Canary Islands, these are locations which are primarily within the location itself. There are a lot of activities to do. And sometimes what you do is you end up booking a hotel, but in most cases, people end up booking a resort because what they want to be able to do is have the ability to be able to do all the activities within that location. Is that okay?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, good stuff. Second part would be food and beverage. So we looked at the restaurants, and then when we classify this as a major generator for this industry, what we do see is within this sector you have different types of things which are included. So you have restaurants, you have takeaways. When you go to a location, sometimes you don't want to have food in the hotel. You say, okay, I'll order Uber Eats, or I'll order a takeaway, or I'll order a Chinese if the facility is not within the hotel. So then they tend to be, one of the key things that people will do when they travel is that they will need to have food. You will wine and dine. There is no way that you can survive without food, even if you want to. But you will look at various options for having food, or basically enjoying wining and dining. So sometimes you will see that you can do it within the hotel. You go out to restaurants. You will do takeaways, fast foods. There are lots of different types, and all these are classified under the food and beverage, which is an important core of this particular sector. Okay. Now, just to identify here, what I've done is I put across some. When we talk about lots of different types of what we want to be able to do is under this sector, let's specify very clearly what are the key categories. So one is quick service, food, which is off-the-counter food, and that is what we look at when we look at restaurants like McDonald's, KFC, Subway, Pizza Hut, and things like that. Then there are the ones which are catering businesses. That means if you are in a particular location, you're traveling, and it's a family or it's a full group which is traveling, sometimes what you end up doing is you arrange for catering services to take care of that occasion. And it normally is seen in the case of wedding parties, birthday parties, or when a family or a group is traveling on a particular specific vacation or a trip. So here you will see catering also happening, because when we look at exhibitions, when we look at large meeting events and incentive trips, sometimes you will see that they ask you to fill up a form. So what kind of food would you like? Are you a vegan, non-vegetarian, things like that. And the clear example of this is when we look at airlines industry, right? Whenever you are taking a flight, you always have to kind of sign off what kind of meal would you prefer, isn't it? So airline industry within this sector relies on catering, because it's packaged food which comes in, it is quickly served, but there's a slight bit of difference between that being pre-packaged and being quickly served, is because what you will see is when you're 33,000, 40,000 feet up in the air, there is no way that you can order food from McDonald's or KFC. So here the concept of catering actually comes in, wherein at the time of booking the tickets, what you're able to do is define the type of meal that you would want to have. And obviously, airline industry has the service to which all the meals, everything comes in, and then they are served when you're flying. And then when you have full service restaurants, sometimes when you go to locations, you have the ability to be able to kind of speak to the chef, and the chef can take requests from guests to be able to prepare food. When you look at room service, for example, that is a concept wherein you see that you have a menu available, but within the menu you're still able to make in food. I'll do my, can you do my toast or my sandwiches without this, or can you add that? And they still accommodate you, because the hotel or the place that you're staying in has the capability of having a full service restaurant or a chef at hand, and that is where they can prepare meals, which basically would mean, which will suit to your styling or your preference, and to a certain extent, you can have for special occasions, say, okay, can we have the birthday cake being brought in, or can that be done, or a toast can be done, and things like that. So they would mean that sometimes when you book vacations, you look at a full service restaurant would mean that something which can serve different types of cuisines, has the ability to be able to order bespoke meals, and from time to time it allows you to do wining and dining within the location of your stay. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now, also to drill down this into a bit more would be when we look at, sometimes I think think I'll probably put it this way, that, over the years that I've traveled, what I've started to do is I've looked at being very specific in terms of where you go and stay, what kind of things you get in terms of facilities and amenities. And then over a point in time, you also, because I'm a vegetarian, I tend to pick or places wherein I'm quite sure that they have a lot of variety in terms of, say for example, offering vegetarian food, or at least have one or two different types of restaurants wherein they have the ability to be able to serve, vegetarian food. So when we look at the various, if you are looking in the nitty-gritty, then sometimes you go into those to be able to see that, okay, because I'm going for a vacation or I'm going for a holiday, and I go go to this place, quite often. And the reason why I've chosen this place is that I know exactly what I can get in that location, the food. Sometimes you look at paying emphasis and attention on what kind of food can be served or would be available to be served in that location. So that is one of the key decision, making process that you look at when you kind of shortlist a hotel or a location to stay in.
Okay.
And when we look at the other side of the concept, which is looking at that sometimes you'd see a location that you try and book, but you go out and have meal in other locations, other hotels within the same location. And the reason when you do this is because you've heard about the restaurant or the reviews, and those reviews about the restaurant kind of give it a bit of a classification that it's a Michelin star restaurant or a 3-star restaurant, and things like that. So here the emphasis is primarily on the presentation, the management of the food, the kind of it serves, and the catering, going around, serving that food. So sometimes you say, okay, I want to look at a very classic setting, or you want to look at a very posh setting. And the reason why you use these words or phrases is because you want to be having dinner which is exclusive, or in some cases, very special, to make that event very special. So here the idea is that you can go to a lot of restaurants, get the meal, get the food, have dinner or lunch, but sometimes you look at specifications and you look at classifications in terms of okay, and I want to have food, or I want to have dinner in a very special restaurant. And that is where the emphasis within the food industry goes in to create the star system. Say for example the Michelin star system, wherein the focus and the attention is on primarily the processes in terms of how food is prepared, where it is procured from, how is the presentation done, what kind of beverages are available. So you have cocktails, mocktails, those kind of things. And then, in terms of how the food is served, the ambience in general, where you sit and have the food. Is it a location wherein you have a balcony view or a window view and things like that? So that becomes important within this sector, because that helps to drive prices or premium prices within the food sector. So you can have a dinner sometimes when you're out and about, in a certain amount of money, but sometimes you have a 3-course meal or a 5-course meal, and then you end up spending an appropriate amount of money, because you're paying not just for the food, but you're paying for the premiumness of the location, the kind of catering, the serving it has, and obviously what are the processes through which the food is procured, prepared, and then presented accordingly. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Is that clear enough?
Yes.
Okay, let's look at briefly, the third part, which is travel and tourism. That means one of the activities through which you travel within the sector is travel and tourism. So there are various types which I've explained that you do, and there are various modes of transport. So when I say types, I'm referring to the modes of transport here. And these transport could be train, airlines, cruise ships. Sometimes you look at a combination of them, which could be a coach. If you take a cruise, you normally would travel overnight in the cruise, but during the course of the day, you have coach tours or, road tours, which primarily take you into various cities and various locations when you're traveling on a cruise. So the mode of transport also provides, a large amount of contribution to this sector. And depending on the mode of transport you choose, there are lots of associated activities which can happen within the mode of transport. So, for example, the in-flight entertainment system. This was a major innovation within the airlines, cruise ships, wherein you have on-demand movies and other things that you can, kind of look at and pay for, or order and pay for. And these things then allowed people choices, and choices meant that again different types of revenue could be collected from different type of customers traveling for tourism purposes. So sometimes you will see that within the airlines you have an economy seat, you have a super economy or a world traveler, and then you have a first class, you have a business class, and you have a lounge or a cabin as well in some of the flights now in the A380. But again, the idea is you are all traveling. When we travel to a holiday, we all travel on. If you're going to an overseas or a different destination, take a flight or things like that. But again, the segmentation of how much each traveler is spending is happening because differentiation in terms of features that the traveler is looking at. So some of them are able to travel business class, some of them are able to travel first class on long haul flights. Some of them want a cabin or a kind of a facility wherein you can, pretty much sleep overnight if it's a very long flight. And in some cases, you're traveling economy. So here again, differentiation in terms of collection of revenue can happen, and that is why this sector has become important. Now, I was trying to get together some facts for the airline industry, and looking at how many airlines, for example, operate out of Heathrow and what kind of taxes you pay. So what I could find out from Visit Britain's website is that when you look at Heathrow and Gatwick, the two most busiest airports, Heathrow obviously the most busiest in Europe, there a plane lands and takes off. Every 26 seconds a plane lands, and every 32 seconds a plane takes off. So if there is a disruption, because of weather, or for example, in the last couple of days there were thunderstorms and things like that, there was a bit of disruption in Gatwick. People were trying to get away for the half-term, holidays here, and that led to a disruption primarily for about, I think, good 20,000 passengers. That means cancelled flight, lost revenues, and all those things then had to be looked at by various agencies that we're going to talk about, things like AFTA, TOL, and civil aviation. So they then had to put together everything as quickly as possible so that the disruption was actually minimized. But the disruption was caused by, thunderstorms, which is primarily climate related, or sorry, weather related. And here, this sector loses a lot of money, but also has to adapt to changes which are happening because of the changing demand of the consumer in this particular sector. So this is one of the key components within the travel, tourism, hospitality sector, because when you have decided that you want to take a holiday or a vacation, what is going to happen is you will need a mode of transport. And without a mode of transport, whether it's road, rail, airline, cruise ship, whatever it is, this is an important, peg in that particular, step for either taking a holiday or a vacation.
Okay.
Then entertainment industry. Now there are lots of different types of things that you look at traveling for. Sometimes you're traveling for just for the purposes of entertainment. So entertainment has become a very vast field within the sector and contributes a lot of revenue. Now there are different types of entertainments which people look at, or activities which lead to entertainment which people look at, experiences people look at. Some of the small things that we look at, would be things like you travel for a hen do, or you travel, for example, to a destination, for a bachelor's party, things like that. Now, they tend to be primarily for entertainment purposes. You're traveling for, say, a christening party or a birthday party or a wedding occasion. That primarily tends to be falling under the category of entertainment. The example of casinos that I gave you earlier, was essentially is a very important part of the entertainment, settings within, this particular sector. So there are different types. There are marinas. You travel sometimes for entertainment, which is sports and gaming. When you look at some of the derbies that you go to, say, for example, a lot of people travel and for football. So when the teams are playing abroad in Europe for different matches, they travel. You get tickets. You're traveling primarily for sports. Sometimes people follow Grand Prix quite a lot, and they go across, with their teams, those who can afford. So these are travels which are happening for sport purposes. Similarly, you look at, cruises, you look at nightclubs, you look at bars. They are all a part of the entertainment industry, which bring in a lot of revenue, as far as one of this sector is concerned. Then we look at the concept of timeshare. This is a new thing coming into this sector. And the reason I've put it up here as timeshare as the fifth sector instead of others is that in others, it is quite self-explanatory why we are doing. But timeshare as a concept is coming up increasingly as a modern concept in tourism in the last 4 or 5 years, is because when you look at examples like Airbnb, when you look at the cab sharing service, you look at, some of these innovative technological advancements which are coming in. You have the ability to be able to, kind of go into a location, take a villa on a timeshare basis for the year, wherein you have a specific time wherein you come and stay in that hotel or in the villa. And those features, which are coming into this particular sector now, are emerging primarily because people are looking at having some sort of an ownership of a place. And that ownership is coming under the concept of something called timeshare. Now, I might want to go to Spain every year, have a holiday, but over a point in time, I start to think that I come here, once in 2 years, 3 years, I like this location. Why not have something which I can come to on a more permanency basis? Now, there are ways that you can go in and say, okay, I can afford to buy a villa or maybe afford to buy an apartment there. But if it's not the case, then the concept of timeshare comes in, which allows you to kind of, say that you're paying a certain amount of association fees for the year, and then you have the availability of that apartment, villa, condominium, whatever you call it, for a certain number of days throughout the year. And that is the concept of something called timeshare, and that is now which is coming in, to a certain extent, wherein people are now looking at this as a kind of a major thing within the sector, which is also leading and creating a lot of revenues for the industry. And Airbnb is a concept which we look at primarily, which primarily has come out of this. And today you're able to kind of go to any city, any location, and what you can do is you can, rather than what you can look at is you can go in and rather than booking a hotel or a place, you can hire a house or a villa or an apartment. This is something which is coming across to the timeshare service, or basically a sharing service. So a lot of people have kind of joined on to this service, wherein you are then able to speak to the owner directly through the website, arrange for a stay on a price that suits you, and then you at the end of the day leave that you stay in that place, you leave that place as you inherited, or you leave apart some expenses for cleaning and stuff, and that allows you to have something which is on a sharing basis. So timeshare is that concept which I've kind of mentioned here, and it is becoming important because as people travel more and more for various reasons, they are going to the same locations, which is coming across from research, especially the travelers which are over the age of 45 and 45 and over. They tend to travel to same locations, more often, and that is where the concept of timeshare is actually coming in. Now, let's go across.
Okay, so can I ask a question? Because throughout my studies so far, I have been taught that, timeshare is actually part of, like, an example of hotel or something. So is it that it shouldn't be classed under that, or should it be classed under its own umbrella and not under barely part of the lodging?
See, as of now, if I look at modern times for studies which are being conducted after 2015, timeshare is now put across as a separate category.
Okay.
The reason being that there are unique business models which are coming up, wherein that allows people to travel to a location, and in the case of boarding and lodging of stays in general for hotels, people are able to arrange alternate accommodations using the use of the concept of timeshare. And that is quite prominently seen as of now within this particular service of Airbnb. Timeshare is also allowed in the case of, when we look at holiday resorts, we look at villas, we look at convention centers. So over the years, convention centers, yes, obviously government creates the infrastructure, or maybe a private public partnership creates the infrastructure. But at the end of the year, what tends to happen is that it becomes synonymous as a location for a particular event, and that then is hired or shared on a time and revenue sharing basis to different organizers which want to host activities there. And an example here which I would give you is, for example, when Mobile World Congress, which I mentioned previously in some of the discussions, like FIRA is a location which has come out of a pure business commercial perspective between public and private partnership in Spain between the government and the organizers. Now that location hosts the main event which they host twice a year across the, in this, when I say across the year, in February and September, I think, or that is the main event. But apart from that, that location is still hired out or, kind of leased out for doing other smaller events throughout the year. But that essentially as a venue is owned by, say, for example, Mobile World Congress for a period of 7 to 10 years. But on a time sharing, revenue sharing basis, they kind of hire that or let that venue go on hire for other smaller events happening in that location throughout the year. So time share is now becoming an important contributor because a lot of infrastructure projects which are coming across, they require a larger break even in terms of time. And in order to get that break even done sooner, what the industry is now experimenting is with the concept of time share. Now, the other example that I will give you is, which I use personally, is that I have a timeshare in the States with Hilton Hotel. So I can go across for a 10-day holiday, across the year, and I pay a fixed fees to Hilton to stay in about 600 different properties in the US.
Okay, wow.
And this is done because they have a lot of unutilized capacity in terms of rooms and suites in the US now, because when people start to travel, the destination was very popular. But what is happening over the years is because the things that people are doing, you're traveling again and again, and you're familiar with now destinations, you're not willing to travel to that destination again. So over a point in time, there is a bit of a decline that you see in the number of tourist numbers happening to a location, and that is where the large hotel chains and some of the big chains have now started to experiment with the concept of timeshare, saying that okay, in order to fill the unutilized capacity, or rather than leave the rooms open, what they want to do is create this association of timeshare, and subject to you being a member, paying a membership fees for the year, that timeshare is available on a first come first serve basis. So I can't say that I want to go in on such and such date. You put the dates on the calendar, and if nobody else has chosen it, they normally tend to do a timeshare with, say, for a particular room with 10 to 15 people, and on a first come first serve basis. If you book it, you get that for that day. Otherwise, or that time during the course of the year. Otherwise, it is then obviously used by the hotel, for guests and other services. So this as a concept is coming up. It still remains a concept, within the accommodation and lodging side. But yes, it's showing great, growth in terms of revenue, and that's why I think, after 2015, this is being classified now as a concept separately, as against being clubbed with other categories.
Okay.
You have now this, also available to look at in things like, private hire jets. A lot of people are now in that income level within the UK and other developed countries wherein you can hire a private jet for a certain number of days. So that also is timeshare, but that is owned by a company which runs the fleet, or like luxury cars, for example, sports cars. If you want to drive, I know a lot of people in London, when they come in for visiting, they try and drive a lot of luxury cars, and that also is under a concept of timeshare. You pay expensive insurance, and you pay, I think, from what I can remember, say, for example, the hiring of limousine, for example, if you want to hire it out for a birthday party or for a night out, in the olden days, I think probably it was about £300-500, for about two hours or so in London. So that kind of concept has been in existence for a number of years, but now that it is becoming popular, it is being segregated separately because it drives higher revenue, as a category with regards to some of the things and activities that it supports.
Okay.
Now, let's look at vertical and horizontal integration. Now, the definition, let's look at horizontal integration. Horizontal integration, it would mean that, there are two players who are trying to merge the businesses, and they offer kind of just very similar services. So when you look at mergers of airlines, when you look at some hotel chains merging together or working closely together to offer or build capacity, you see a horizontal integration because they are in the same business. They are in the same business of lodging. They're in the same business of, say, for example, airlines, or you will see, for example, in certain cases, some restaurant chains they merge because they do see that they are in the same business of providing or serving food. So horizontal integration typically happens when you will see two businesses come together to build capacity or to become or to offer larger offerings. Like a tour operator might only cater to Western Europe, but there is a tour operator which has opportunities in Eastern Europe, and the two operators actually decide to merge. They are going to be offering the same packages or same type of services, but because they merged and they offer the same, they are now able to cover a larger geography, both Eastern and Western Europe. So here you will see that a lot of significant mergers happen within this industry from time to time. And I think the last one that I can look at is the First Choice Group actually acquired, the First Choice Travel Agency, because they said that we are a tour operator, and in order to have a brick and mortar model and have a lot of locations from which we can sell our own services, because they have their own flights, they have tie-ups with hotels, properties that they have across Europe. What it meant was that it was easier to have an integrated offering and get all the revenues into one basket rather than having it segregated across travel agents, supermarkets, or for example, airlines and hotels and others. So we saw horizontal integration happening when we looked at, this as an example. And this typically, is subject to a bit of a regulation in this industry. And that is what we will talk about in the subsequent slides. So when we look at horizontal integration here, the key takeaway that we want to look at is there are two businesses, two industries which are merging or are coming together to kind of gain a bigger market, get a larger share in the market, but they offer pretty much the same services. Now, when we look at vertical integration here, what we are looking at is slightly different. What we find is that the typical example of vertical integration would be here a company is trying to buy out a similar organization, but it provides certain distinct services within that value chain. An example here would be when I look at Virgin Group in particular. Now, Virgin Group has lots of different, kind of services they provide. So they are in they also have trains, but they did not have any traction in what we call road, connectivity, or for example, any let's put it this way, services that they used to provide on the road. So what the Virgin Group did was they did a strategic tie-up with Stagecoach Group, which is basically a large coach company in the UK, and they provide unique services in terms of travel across cities, and that is Stagecoach. So what they did was they went into partnership with Stagecoach so that in their offering they had air travel, they had rail travel, but did not have road travel. So what they did was they went into a sector wherein they now are able to offer, because of this partnership with Stagecoach, air, rail, and transport by road travel as well. So what they've tried to do is integrate vertically into all the three different types of travel which people can do when they travel for either vacation, holidays, or whatever business, personal, professional reasons. So this is an example of vertical integration. Vertical integration can also be seen, if I give you a different example, just to understand this, would be that when you look at car manufacturers, what car manufacturers typically tend to do is that if you see a large manufacturer like Mercedes, for example, over the years, this car manufacturer has now been the group holding is Daimler, Mercedes. So this is a group which owns a lot of brands under the Mercedes group. So they own, let me give you another example, but within the car industry, because I'm aware of that. So when we look at, say, for example, Volkswagen Group, which was also in the news, and I think you should be able to relate to that. Why was Volkswagen in the news in the last couple of months? Anybody recalls? I'm not too sure on your side in Tobago, Antonio, but yeah, in the US. Chelsea, any idea in terms of why was Volkswagen in the news in the last couple of months?
No, I can't remember.
Right, okay. there is a diesel emissions scandal, car emissions scandal, which has erupted in the industry, which is one of the largest scandals which has come out. And Volkswagen Group was implicated in this scandal because they said that in order to promote the diesel cars or diesel engine cars, fuel cars, the group had kind of suppressed, reports of diesel emissions from their cars, and this has led to a $20 billion write-off, which Volkswagen is now currently serving, because they have found anomalies in the emissions which the car manufacturer actually initially printed and promoted were lesser as compared to what actually the emissions are from the diesel car or diesel fuel cars. So this has led to a lot of recall of cars in the US, all over the world, in Europe, in China, in other locations as well. And Volkswagen Group has been asked to put aside $20 billion in order to deal with this particular scandal. Now this, so over the years, that is a different part. The reason I'm explaining this would be vertical integration. So Volkswagen as a company, obviously is just, they make Volkswagen cars. But over the years, what they had done was they manufacture passenger cars, which were very well respected. They were known for value for money, fuel efficient cars. But over the years, what they tried to do is, in order to create an image wherein they have a larger segment that they can serve for customers, what they have done is they have taken up and acquired a lot of luxury brand cars and brought it under the Volkswagen banner. So a lot of us probably don't know that, say, for example, when we look at Porsche as a brand is owned by Volkswagen Group. So when we look at Maybach, which is again a British brand, but is owned by Volkswagen Group. So what they did was, in order to look at catering to markets that they were expanding, like China in particular, they wanted to have an offering of premium luxury cars within their own brand name or under their own group. So what Volkswagen did was, it's not happened in the last 10 years, but they've over the last 3 or 4 decades acquired a lot of different brands of car manufacturers in order to bring them under their own group, so that they have a very large offering catering to value for money customers, economy customers, premium economy customers, premium and luxury car customers. So they own a lot of brands now, which are primarily cars for the common man, from there to cars which are the most luxurious cars, as far as the car manufacturing business is concerned. So Volkswagen also owns, if I'm correctly right, the Audi group as well. So it is the largest car manufacturing group outside Toyota, which is Japanese manufacturer. But what they've done is, with the acquisition of so many different brands of cars, the Porsche, the Maybach, they also own, I think, the Swedish car manufacturer, which is Skoda now, and they up till Audi. So that means they are able to give now offerings to all different types of customers, different types of cars, and that is an example of vertical integration. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Let me just double check in terms of my information. Audi is owned by, I think, I'm pretty sure, the Volkswagen Group. So, yeah, Audi owns the Volkswagen Group. Is owned by actually the Volkswagen Group. So they are one of the biggest manufacturers, and obviously, the reason why they acquired some of these brands over the years was to be able to widen their offering, and because they've gone into different types of segments, but more or less similar types, would be primarily looking at something called integration, which they've done. So what they've tried to do is bring in different types of car price points to be able to offer to customers, and that will be an example of an integration, why you see mergers and acquisition happening. So when we look at Virgin Group doing a partnership with Stagecoach, we look at vertical integration because they were not into road transport but air and rail, and they've gone into something totally different as a category, and that is vertical integration. But when we look at similar businesses acquiring, similar and are then offering similar services, you will see that as horizontal integration. Now, let's look at a few quick, brief slides, which I put together, and they are something that you will go through at your end. But, when we were looking at mentioning some key, agencies within this sector, we look at one which is called ATHE. And this basically is an agency, which looks at, it's a trade association which looks at, bringing together the tour operators and travel agencies, and their responsibility is to primarily grow the business. And they've been going for about 60 years. A lot of holiday agents, tour travel agencies, they advertise APTA logo because it is considered synonymous with, a kind of a consistent offering. And they then put measures in, over the years, they put some measures and legislation in place which actually looks at dispute resolution amongst customers, consumers, travel agencies, and tour operators. Okay. Now, there's something called Federation of Tour Operators, which is separate from APTA, and APTA is tour operators and travel agents together, but FTO is primarily just tour operators. Now, here they are more interested in kind of, looking at developing overseas destinations. So FTOs in the UK, which is an organization currently works with a lot of tour operators to kind of facilitate, the availability of destinations where UK tourists would want to travel. And say, for example, when you look at traveling outside the UK or when you look at foreign destinations, you will also see that in some cases, some of the tour operators and travel agents would advertise an FTO logo because they want to be seen as a part of an organization which is also regulated, and they are able to offer, consistent packages and meet requirements which are set by, the different organizations, agencies worldwide. We also look at something called the Association of Independent Tour Operators, or AITO. Now, AITO is slightly different from FTO and APTA is because AITO is formed of smaller companies or smaller operators. What they felt was when this particular association was created, they felt that our voice in terms of, the small businesses which constitute travel hospitality sector in particular, like the beds and breakfast, and, you look at other ancillary factors which work with this sector, they kind of said that our voice is not heard within the FTOs and the larger organizations. So what they did is they ended up creating something as an independent, organization called ITO, and they kind of then looked at, specialist services or smaller services which were not taken care of when we look at national tourism in particular. So you will see that when you look at tourist information brochures within the UK or any particular country, when we look at city breaks, we look at, popularizing of tourism related activities within a particular city. Here you will see the, the workings, closer workings of the Association of Independent Tour Operators, because they are more interested in national tourism or tourism in a particular location because of the size of the business and the size of the operators that they are. Last but not the least, I think I would just quickly look at something called the, Civil Aviation Authority. Now, this basically regulates any sort of, airports. We have something called the Airports Authority. In some places, it's called the Civil Aviation Authority. Their responsibility is to keep the airports, safe, up and running, and they are a key part of this particular sector, which derives a lot of revenue. When you travel to locations, you pay a tax. On your flight ticket, when you're traveling, you're paying some sort of an airport tax. And the reason why you pay that airport tax is because there are lots of other services which are related and maintained in the airport, things like security or baggage handling. These are things which the Civil Aviation Authority or the Airports Authority actually looks at, and that is where they are a key part of, this particular sector. Because if security lapses happen, or if the packages are not, handled properly, because these are ports on which a lot of transition or travel of, passengers happens, they become an integral part. And obviously, you have lots of law and legislation around this in order to ensure, say for example, safety of passengers. Sometimes you see and you hear no liquids allowed on flight. This is not allowed, and these are things which are, created as code or law by the aviation authority operating in a particular country.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, there are some other things which are things like the Trade Description Act, like in the UK in particular. If you book anything, you have the right to cancel or, get a full refund or a claim if you book something within 14 days or 28 days. And these are part and parcel of, some of the acts which have been created to, keep the consumer, safe or protected when you book your holidays. So some of these things are put together, just for knowledge sake, so that when you are traveling next or when you're taking a holiday next, at least you will get to see these guidelines printed on your airline ticket, your tour operators, itinerary, and this is where they have to comply with this legislation, so that sometimes if you have a cancellation or if you have issues, then you are able to claim back some of those money, because of insurance or related services. So there is a EU package travel regulation which is in place. There is something called the Trade Description Act, which protects you against unfair services or falsified information if it is being given by a tour operator. And it basically says, you're going to a hotel, you'll have 5-star facilities, you'll have this, and that. But you end up going to that location and you find that this is missing, that is missing, and it is not there as per what the description was given. Then in that case, you can, go back and sue the operator or ask for a refund under the Trade Description Act, because the description of the product as described when it was sold to you is not exactly the way it was described. So it's falsified information, and that comes in. The Consumer Protection Act, in the UK is pretty standard, because it allows customers to return, a particular product if they find it to be, not fit for purpose or the pricing is different. Sometimes you see concepts like these being applied if you shop in large retail stores and you have a price match. If I say that I find this thing, on Amazon and you're selling on your website at this price, can I do a price match? So this kind of things are covered under the Consumer Protection Act, so that you're not paying an extortion price, for a particular product or a service when it is available elsewhere, at a certain price.
Okay.
Now, let's look at very briefly, the last part, which is why do we need classification when we look at tourism and tourism activities? Now, what I've done is I've put this slide before it, because what I want to do is I want to kind of make it clear that why do we need classification? The reason why we need classification is sometimes you would say, an example at home is that, your kids might come in and say, okay, I need to do this. You ask them a reason why you want to do this. And the reason why you ask them this question is because you want to know the background or the reason why they are asking for this. So when we look at, relating it to tourism in particular, sometimes it is important when you fill up those surveys or, feedback questionnaires, that why did you travel to this destination, or, why did you book this hotel, or why you looked at ordering this particular service. They want to look at the various categories of why and how you want, you have traveled, or what are the clear reasons behind why this was taken. And that is why classification is important, because next time this industry basically thrives on the fact that it thrives on something called customization. So if you are giving an experience which is bringing across, a delight, quality of service, something which gives you a reason to remember the location or the service that you've received, is all dependent on something called customization. And the more you get customization done in this, industry, in terms of learning the preferences, the things that you like, the things you don't like, that allows the players in this industry to offer you services which are meeting your requirement and your criteria. And to a certain extent, that is one of the reasons why classification is required. So the purpose has to be defined, and why you're taking the trip, why are you going to this location again, what did you particularly like about, and the reason why you're booking this, are all reasons why they want to understand how best they can collect this data to put some sort of a classification in place, and that helps them to provide, quality services or create experiences which you will remember, and that will keep you bringing back to this location again and again. So that is one of the reasons why you look at classification. Now, how do we do classification? So we've understood why we want to classify, but how do you classify? You see the difference? We are talking about why do we classify, and now we are saying how do we do classification. So classification can be done to determine why you're taking the trip. What are the reasons why you want to take this trip? Sometimes you classify, on the basis of expenditure that you want to do in a location. So sometimes you will say that I want to book a holiday, but I want to book it within, say, $2,000. Or you want to say, I want to book it between $5,000 and I want to pay for everything, travel, flights, food, and sightseeing. Sometimes you classify this from a point of view of saying, okay, I'm going for business travel, or I'm going for attending an occasion, I'm going to attend a function, I'm going to attend a wedding. So you look at various reasons of why you want to classify and understand why the person is traveling. And if you know the reasons why the person is traveling, sometimes you can create the trips around that reason, around those reasons, to be able to ensure that the quality of the delivery in terms of experience which they are expecting is there. Is that okay?
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Now, from an industry standpoint of view, we do two types of classification when we look at people traveling for tourism purposes. One is personal, the other is business. And the personal side of things could be classified under these categories. Now, we briefly mentioned and alluded to these categories in the previous session. So things like holiday, leisure and recreation, visiting friends, education and training, health and medical benefit, or reasons for medical tourism. You look at religious reasons for travel, shopping. Sometimes people want to go across on, during the Christmas holidays here in the UK. You have flight tickets from London to London Heathrow or Gatwick to New York, probably at as low as 229, because people want to go across and travel and do Christmas shopping, in the US. So you have various reasons why people want to travel, and sometimes they classify as reasons for traveling could be shopping, and sometimes it is transit. That means you're in between airports when you're taking flights, and that could also be reasons that you want to go in and maybe stay in a location only for a few hours, meet people for business reasons. You have this business, what you call the business lounges in most hotels now, wherein some of these meetings do tend to happen, and those are happening when you're in transit, when you're traveling, but you're in transit, you're not at your main destination. So
Okay.
some of these are self-explanatory, but what I've done is, because holiday, leisure, and recreation is one of the biggest activities which could be classified under, personal reasons for travel, I've kind of split this up into different activities. So you're going for knowledge, recreation, which could be sightseeing, could be going to, visit some, architectural things. It could be for recreational purposes, entertainment. You might go and stay in a hotel which is peace and quiet and not go out of the hotel that much. You could go out and do some sporting activities. Like sometimes you go to Dubai and other places, you go across and experience, desert safari, or if you go to a beach resort, you do scuba diving and, water sports, those kind of things. So the classification helps tailor packages to meet the tourist needs. That's the main key takeaway of this slide. Okay.
Okay.
If I know why you're traveling to a location and what are the main reasons for traveling to that location, I can tailor those packages and make those available to you so that I can get the maximum revenue when people travel to that destination.
Okay.
Now, when you look at business and professional, there are lots of reasons why, again, we look at business and professional travel. And here again, I've kind of summarized them in, small circles. So you're going for MICE, which is meetings, conferences, or exhibitions. You're sometimes going to do and attend trainings. So a lot of people actually look at training events which they host, which are very close to convention centers, airport, because they are only attracting visitors or tourists coming in from companies and organizations primarily for the purpose of training or education. You will also see sometimes charitable work happens on under this particular category. For example, natural disasters, if they occur, then there's a large responsive force which actually goes across from a particular country or a particular destination to meet those requirements. But that is again professional reasons wherein you're going to provide aid, medical aid, things like that. And then business travel could also be for sports purposes, could be for recreational activities to a certain extent. When you see CEOs of organization, when you see G20, a good example of this would be the Davos conference, which happens in Europe every year in Davos. And that is a culmination wherein you have a lot of bureaucrats, top officials from the government offices, countries, prime ministers, president, and also the CEOs of organizations. They converge to have a conclave which lasts for about 5 to 7 days, and they discuss a lot of things, during that, which is policies, economic growth, things in terms of investment, business deals, and that happens because of business as well as professional reasons. But for in some cases, it could also be recreational because the CEO of the company is going there to do some guest lectures or some guest seminars, and it could be a holiday come business reason. Is that
Okay.
okay? Now let's look at, if we do classification, there are lots of challenges. Now there is no perfect classification of why people travel, and what could be the reasons why they travel. Sometimes you end up doing an exit survey or a survey at the end of the stay, at the end of your stay at the hotel. It says, did you travel for personal or professional or business reasons? And sometimes you will see in travelers end up ticking all the three boxes, because you might have had a meeting, one odd meeting when you were there, and mostly your travel would have been for personal reasons, which is holiday. But you end up doing a tick on the business also because you've had one or two business meetings. So there are lots of challenges sometimes, the classification comes under, and these challenges are primarily because if you are able to predict and if you are able to understand the person is traveling and why you're frequently traveling to that location, then the hotels then have the ability to be putting you into something of what is called the loyalty programs. So if you go and stay in the hotel time and again, you become you get a loyalty card and you are able to build points, and they are able to understand your billing and everything and then cater to your services accordingly. If I go and stay in a particular hotel, I know I'm coming in for business stay, and I normally come in the mornings, check in, and then next day I leave. But you end up utilizing 3 or 4 different types of services. For example, a long service. For example, you might only have a dinner in that location because when you check in the mornings, you're going to the venue, and then you come back in the evening, you only have dinner, and the next day you check out. You end up doing taxi service because you'll always end up booking the taxi from the hotel to the airport. And this classification then helps tailor some of the services and packages that people end up having under the loyalty programs. And that is why classification is required, because it helps predict revenues, help predicts habit, and the preference the customers have when they travel to a particular destination. Now, what are the challenges? The challenge is to understand these classifications. Sometimes you will see that if you do exit surveys and questionnaires and you pick a lot of categories, it might be difficult for them to say that whether you travel for personal, business, or professional reasons, and that means they are not able to get a conclusive result. The other thing is sometimes you will see responses are dependent on what information is provided by the visitors. So if you want to take a feedback that, okay, was the room service okay, was the room meeting your expectation? So you see some of these questions are quite open-ended, and sometimes they are also with multiple choice options given to you, because what they want to do is they want to exactly fit you into a category, whether the room was meeting your expectations, yes or no, or not applicable, right?
Okay.
If they say yes, it was, but, and then sometimes they say maybe, then what is happening is it is not allowing them to collect data, which then can be put into some sort of a format for reusage or doing some analysis. Now, other things you will also see that when you look at visa system, that also helps to do a bit of classification in the sector. A lot of countries have a lot of different types of visas that you can get when you decide to travel to a particular location. Now, mostly all visas are classified as tourist visas. In the UK, for example, I'll give you as an example, I'll mention UK. Now, UK has, I think, 5 or 6, maybe not 6, 7 or 8 different types of visas. And the reason why they want to look at this classification is they want to understand why you're coming into the country. And then they can try and predict what kind of services you would use within the sector. So when you look at, there is something called a Tier 1 visa. And Tier 1 is an entrepreneur visa. That means people who have 5 million, 10 million, 2 million, or 200,000 pounds can come into the country and then settle within a span of 1 to 5 years. But then this helps the government to understand whether the person are going to be, when the business or the organization coming in or the person coming in will be able to bring revenue to the country. Will it create employment? How much employment will it create? And for how long it will create? There are Tier 2 visas, which are work permits. There are Tier 4 visas, Mhm. There are tier 5 visas, which are primarily, I think, for people who want to come in and gain experience within the sector. There are diplomat visas, there are tourist visas, and I think there's
Mhm.
one more category which is, I think, diplomat visas. So there are 6 or 7 types. And the reason why it helps is because this classification of visa system helps the immigration officials understand why you're visiting the country. So classification sometimes is important, but when you look at a category like tourist visa, you get that for 3 months, 6 months. In some cases, like the US, you apply for a visa for the first time, you might get it for 10 years if you apply 10 years. But in some
Okay.
cases, it's like a lottery system. You might get it or you might not get it at all. In some countries, they have visa on arrival. That means you can come in, you can have, you can stay in the country for 3 days or a week. But beyond that, if you need to stay, then you have to apply for a specific visa. So this classification in general is also, applicable for this industry. And one such type of classification which happens at the port of entry happens at the immigration. And that is
Yeah.
why some you will see that when you look at tour operators and package operators which offer packages, the difference between travel agents and tour operators becomes distinct in this case is that the tour operators are able to arrange for visas as well if you need one. But the travel agents aren't able to because they do not look at immigration or immigration related matters. They only look at selling you, stay and hotel stays and flight and, those kind of things. So classification, is important from that point of view. But some of the challenges are that when you come in, even on tourist, you might be doing business activities, which are not allowed, but you might still be transacting business or meeting people, under the pretext that you are a tourist. And that is where the challenge of classification, comes in into this particular industry. Is that
Okay.
okay? Good
Yes.
stuff. Now, so I think I've covered, this part, which is primarily to do with learning outcome 3. It's taken a bit of a time out, but I think it was a large learning outcome in any case,
Mhm.
which required for me to cover a couple of things. So any
Yes.
questions on this so far?
The horizontal and vertical integration.
Yeah.
Would the merging of like Sainsbury's and Asda, would that class as a horizontal integration?
That will be yes, because they are similar businesses and they offer
Okay, yeah.
similar services in the market. It will be horizontal integration. Yes.
Okay.
Anything else?
That was my only question.
Anything else from your side, Antonio?
No, I think the slides are actually making everything much more easier to understand, though, because from the outset, I did not know what vertical and horizontal integration was. So I think it basically made me understand better now.
Right, okay, good stuff. So basically, I think what I'm going to also do is send you a bit of a handout on the vertical and horizontal integration, and that would primarily, give you some more points. I have covered, I think I put some more details, on the slide from that handout, but, just as a handout, it will be easy for you to go through to understand the concept, and that's something which I'm going to send, which I think is a bit, you might need a bit of help on. But apart from that, I think the roles and main sector types quite self-explanatory. I think it's a explain kind of thing in
Mhm.
terms of doing the assignment should be okay. And classify is also easy because basically classification is only 2 types. But
Mhm.
determine the bit which you need to show explicitly by taking an example when you do the assignment as well. And that's the reason why I will send you a handout on this along with a copy of the presentation. I didn't email
Yeah.
that to you yesterday, but I'm putting it on the Moodle just after the session, so you should be able to access it from there.
Okay.
Okay, that's brilliant. Now, what I'm going to try and do is, I think only one learning outcome is left now, which is destination management. Now, I have
Mhm.
prepared slides for this because, as I mentioned to you earlier when we started this particular unit, OTHM has kind of, muddled in a couple of, key parts in this, and this is normally a separate unit or a module when you study in the course. So
Mhm.
what I'm going to try and do is for destination management, I'm going to put the slides, which is for the LO4 on the Moodle today itself. And if you go through that, and if you do feel that we need to do a session, or if certain things are not clear, then we will do a session next week, on Saturday, to try and bring this unit to a close. But if not, and everything is clear, you can drop me questions, if there are questions on that, and I'll try and see if we can answer. But if I do feel that, you're struggling with that, then we'll do a session, on this next week. Otherwise, we'll try and bring this unit to a close. Destination management is a broad topic which has about 4 or 5 different learning outcomes. But here the idea is you want to only understand this as a concept, why it is important within the industry, and what are the various roles and responsibilities or functions which come out of destination management. And that is it's an overview understanding that you need to have rather than a detailed understanding. So that's why I'll put in the slides for LO4, and they generally will be self-explanatory, but I will put in a handout which I've prepared, which basically says assess the needs of destination management. The other two are explained in outline, which are theoretical, but assess one, I will put a handout out so that you are able to understand why the concept of destination management has arisen and why this is becoming a serious, business within the sector, because a lot of people are now, looking at developing basically economic reasons that some locations in the world you will see are now totally dependent on tourism revenue. And that is why destination management as a concept is important for them, because that the concept or the activity of tourism actually generates more than 50 to 60% of the revenue in that location. So when you look at islands like Maldives, Madagascar, you look at Ibiza, locations which are totally dependent on tourism in terms of tourism and tourism revenue and the activity around tourism. There, the concept of destination management is being applied at the governmental level or at the federal level. And that is why we need to understand this concept, and an overview of this is in the Learning Outcome 4.
Sure.
Okay, brilliant. So you enjoy the rest of your day, both of you, and I will catch up with you either on emails and, if required, then next week on a session to cover LO4.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
I know one other quick thing which I'll mention, the feedbacks on assignments will definitely come this week, because what we're trying to do is squeeze in a visit, with OTHM for certification, which will happen after the 15th of June, but before the 30th. So, and tentatively what we're looking at doing is